by stepping out of your human sensory sack and into perception of other organisms, it does kind of shake that feeling of human self-importance, and you get a kind of feeling of how precious and unusual everything is. Even a blade of grass is pretty whacked out when you really get into it.
Hello and welcome to the Culture and Technology Podcast. I'm your host, Severin Matusek. The Culture and Technology Podcast is a virtual salon initiated by the Vienna Business Agency, in which experts from Vienna and around the globe explore how technology is reshaping the future of culture. What is reality? Throughout the ages, the question of how we experience the world around us has persisted as one of the most fundamental and hard to answer philosophical questions. The tricky thing when thinking about the answers is, of course, it's simply impossible to escape our own bodies, our own brain, and our senses. And thus, we'll never find out what the world looks like for an animal, a tree, or anything else that's not a human being. But what if virtual reality can help us break free from these boundaries? And what if artworks could have the power to fundamentally change our perspective? To find that out, I invited Barnaby Steel to join us. Barnaby is a London-based artist who creates immersive virtual experiences. As a co-founder of Marshmallow Laser Feast, Barney and his team are one of the world's leading art collectives that explore our connection with the natural world through extended reality experiences. Our second guest is Eva Fischer. Joining us from Vienna, Eva is an independent curator, cultural manager, and lecturer. She's also the initiator of CIVA, Vienna's new media art festival, and has been curating and teaching immersive art and experimental media for the past 15 years. Together with Eva and Barney, I sat down to explore how technology can enable us to see the world differently.
As a curator and lecturer, I've been interested in virtual technology since a few years now. And Barney and me first met at a conference in Vienna that the Forward Festival did together with the Vienna Business Agency back then. I'm actually happy to say that we did several nice projects together since that day. And one of my highlights actually was seeing the ocean of air that you did at the Saatchi Gallery in London. From the very first second that you would arrive as a visitor at the Saatchi Gallery, and you would take, or your team would take the audience on this really nice journey. That was a breathing sensor, I think, and a sensor that would measure your heartbeat. And then actually stepping inside this virtual world and being able to see everybody else in terms of having this visualization of everybody's vascular system and visualizing my own breath. That is really something that stayed in my mind. And I found that was a very fascinating virtual experience that I had. I wanted to ask you how that project evolved for you.
Thanks, Eva. It was, it's great to get that feedback because, the making of the work is often in a dark warehouse room. There's the capturing of the work where we were LiDAR scanning sequoia trees, but there's such a contrast between the process of making essentially a computer game and then having real people interact with it. And it's always rewarding to hear. It's probably worth me talking about the kind of incentive behind the work, because we're big believers in, I guess, the power of science to create a perspective shift and a new sense of wonder and appreciation about the world. And I think Richard Feynman is one of our big influences. He's got a great little lecture where he talks about his friend who has a sort of artistic sensibility, looks at a flower and he can maybe be a bit more sensitive to the textures and the colors of that flower. But when Richard, a scientist, looks at the flower, he understands that the reason it's red is because it's co-evolved in relationship to the eyeball of a pollinator. And it asks questions about, does that pollinator have an aesthetic sense like a human does? And there's other deeper sort of beauties to a flower, the way it works, the way it photosynthesizes, its ability to sort of eat sunlight and process that into the energy that's at the source of the food chain and all of life. All of these stories are coming through our scientific observation, and so it always adds to a sense of wonder. And so I think this is really the backbone of what we're doing. We're collaborating with scientists to explore the world that exists beyond the limits of our perception. And another way of thinking about that is looking up at the stars through Hubble Space Telescope. The images that you see from that, they create, they're obviously completely beautiful, almost beyond description. But how does that affect you when you look up at the stars? Because your eyeballs just see these, small pinpricks, but somewhere in your imagination, those images have registered, and it can create a deeper sense of wonder, I think. So to tie all of that together, Ocean of Air is one of these projects that's using our scientific understanding and lens on the world to create that sense of wonder for a forest. So in this experience, we're just revealing the connections between plant and animal through breath. And breath is a great way of breaking down any feeling of separation, because the moment you stop breathing, you die. So you rely on breath for life, but breath is part of a process that ties you into the plant kingdom. The trees create the atmosphere. In order for the trees to create the atmosphere, they're taking the energy from the sun. So essentially, these flows are, when they're made visible, it paints a picture where all of the humans in the scene, you can see the flow of oxygen through their bodies. So you see their kind of branching cardiovascular systems. And then, kind of like umbilical cords, you see the flow of carbon dioxide and oxygen through the air that connects to the trees. And so, in Ocean of Air, we were basically exploring it, making visible those connections. I suppose a really important part to it is this idea of how you see other people in the virtual world. Because when you see, when skin becomes transparent, we found that people interact with strangers, and there's no judgment on age or gender or race. You're all kind of connected as these branching beings. And I think that perspective shift is also true when you start seeing the world not as separate individuals, but as one interconnected system. So that's kind of what we're hoping to get in the work.
Oh, that's very interesting. Actually, we are thinking a lot about avatars and all that, creating a new exhibition environment for the CIVA festival that is going to happen in February. And we're creating all those virtual worlds and want to make people come together. And we're also thinking, about the avatars a lot in terms of, non-binary kind of approach. Did you have any learnings from that?
I've been listening to this guy, Rupert Spearer, and he does ceramics and non-dualism, and he talks about or one sort of perspective on consciousness is that when we think of an actor in a play, I think he talks about Hamlet or somebody. So we know that Hamlet is a character in a play, and that character is not real, but the actor is real. So when the actor puts on the clothes of Hamlet and performs that role, it makes Hamlet feel completely real. And in a similar way, he talks about the reality of time and space that we experience is not real, and it's actually consciousness puts on the clothes of reality and performs it. So actually, all of us are characters in this play of consciousness, but you take a step back from your character, and the source of your awareness is actually flowing through all things. And whether this is true or not, I guess it's one of those things that's very hard to ever put a finger in, but something that does translate is our ability to lose ourselves in a story. I think we can all relate to losing ourselves in a film or in a book. And that place where we're able to sort of empathize or embody characters as if they're ourselves also happens when you're watching dancers. Scientists talk about mirror neurons in the brain and how it actually triggers the way your body would move if you were that dancer. You sort of put yourselves in their shoes. So when you translate this to avatars, it's a way of embodying someone other than yourself in a way that probably requires less imagination, but is also something that's really familiar to us. It's not like, we've been imagining that in all sorts of different ways. We did explore this in a piece called In the Eyes of the Animal, where we put you in the sensory systems of a dragonfly, mosquito, a frog, and an owl. You can't simulate a sense that you don't have, but you can give a sort of poetic sense of what that might be like. It's like trying to explain to a blind person what the richness of color looks like. Words and texture, or the combination of all of your other senses, are never going to add up to the richness of sight. But you can explore some interesting ideas that can give you that sense of how all of this collage of different organisms occupy a forest environment. Each one, imagine how space and time sort of stretch and shrink. If you're a dragonfly, your perceived reality is your eyeballs are so close to your brain, everything's happening really quickly. So it means the world you see around you, it moves a lot slower than it does, say you're human. You also see ultraviolet and infrared color spectrums. And so the more we worked with scientists to understand about different organisms' perception, the more the more exotic and alien it feels, but also how amazing it is that there's all of these different flavors of reality. And somehow, by stepping out of your human sensory sack and into the perception of other organisms, it does kind of shake that feeling of human self-importance, and you get a kind of humbling, well, I guess a feeling of how precious and unusual everything is. Even a blade of grass is pretty whacked out when you really get into it.
And in that sense, how do you also think that science and art can help each other in understanding things? Like, how could you, as an artist, have an impact on scientific research processes?
I guess scientists are playing within quite a structured framework. That's a good thing, right? Because science needs to be accountable and measurable, and otherwise people would just make stuff up, which they are doing, but they're looking to back it up with evidence, right? So there's a process, although science is constantly getting updated, that there's a process and understanding in place. And as an artist, you're quite free to follow intuitions and explore ideas with more creative license and poetry. And the end outcome doesn't need to be a peer-reviewed paper. It can be an experience that's maybe reflecting on something that isn't measurable yet. And so in that sense, I think you can, a lot of the scientific data or scientific observations need to be reduced to the data sets in order to sort of prove something. And sometimes the beauty gets lost in that process. So our lens is absolutely on the beauty, and in sort of revealing levels of beauty that maybe aren't apparent to our eyeballs. A good example would be just looking at a cell through an electron microscope, or we've also been using CT scanners. And so, for example, when you look at the structure of a leaf through a CT scanner, you get such a crazy resolution. It feels like a sort of vaulted cathedral, and the inner structures have beautiful symmetries, sort of like cathedral roofs. You've got these symmetries that flow through the cells that are really, really quite beautiful, and you just wouldn't know. We've got this piece we want to make about photosynthesis because it's so boring. Traditionally, it can be so boring. And it's reduced to like diagrams because there's nothing you can see at that level. But it's also just really the most crazy idea of this, photons of light smearing into probability waves and hitting the energy centers in leaves. And there's only so much we know, but if you look at, all of the most advanced knowledge on how that's working, there's still a lot of visual imagery and ideas about how these things connect. And it's cosmic energy coming in to feed all of life on the planet. And so we wanted to make an experience that was much more like a spiritual experience of the light and life connecting through that process. And you could see it from different viewpoints, the perspective of a photon or a water molecule, or you could start the journey as carbon dioxide leaving your own mouth and journeying to the leaf where it becomes part of that process. But I guess my point would be that bringing back the experiential or the source of observation back into it and revealing that beauty is something that we think is fun. It all starts with that. It's like, oh, I'd like to experience that. So let's see who we can collaborate with to make that happen.
What I'm always wondering is, on the one hand, I think virtual reality is such a brilliant medium, like when it comes to embodied learning and, getting inside of all that and being part of it kind of also as a body or an avatar. But what I thought during the first years was that it's such a niche and, exclusive medium on the other hand, and that only a few people have access to. Wearing goggles in the museum, or like you did at the Saatchi Gallery. I don't know how many people you reached with that, many, but it could be more maybe. And what really fascinates me now, since a few months and maybe having been pushed through the first lockdown that we were facing, are all those web VR tools that are popping up, and for example, Mozilla Hubs or VR Chat or even Virbella or something like that. And even if it's still restricted in terms of performance and maybe also resolution and stuff, I do have the feeling that those new technologies make all those experiences much more accessible to many people. And we also experienced that a lot in the team. Like, I'm having this super good team of VR artists, developers, IT guys, and curators. And we've been hanging out in several, VR exhibitions online, did a lot of exhibition tours also through our own shows that we released during the last weeks, and met a lot of international people. And we even had, for example, a radio show, a live show being done in one of our spaces. And what I really love about it is the feeling to be in a room together, in the virtual as this third room that might be, but spending time together there. Yeah, and that really makes it special. And how do you feel about that? Did you have a look also at, web VR tools, or I guess that you think a lot about how to reach your audience?
I suppose, mobile phones were like these huge bricks, and only sort of businessmen had them, and they had the battery pack. And now, they're in the hands of everybody. You can see that there's a trajectory of the realism of computer graphics. If you look at, the modern day rendered Hollywood blockbusters, you can't tell the difference between something that's been filmed and something that's been rendered. And so you can see that just around the corner, that level of realism is going to be blurring the line between what's real and what's virtual in a way that's going to be hard to distinguish between the two. And also the accessibility to the devices, eventually it's going to be in the hands of the many. And I think that evolution of technology is something that's impossible to stop, and it's happening. So it's interesting to think, how do you engage with that in a way that can reconnect us to the world around us? Because I think you could say that part of the problems we experience, with deforestation, you're reaching for some body butter in the supermarket because your skin's a bit dry, and somehow your reach extends around the globe and is connected to deforestation in Indonesia. When things become global and you're not aware of the impact of your reach, then it causes problems. But you would never chop down a tree to moisten your to get smooth skin. No one in their right mind would do that. So it's interesting to think, are we trying to disconnect or reconnect? And so with the projects that we're working on, it's always about what happens when you take the headset off. Has the experience in some way, shortened that gap? Have you, through having an intimate breathing experience with a tree, that's a real tree. It's got a GPS position. You can go and visit it. It's been LiDAR scanned. That gives you a connection with a place that you might never visit. So I guess where I'm going with this is sort of thinking about how immersive technology can maybe give us intimate experiences of ecosystems that we maybe should care about but don't care about because there's something that we've never been there and never likely to go there. The same could be said of David Attenborough's nature programs, that a lot of people's experience of nature outside of their TV is pretty limited. Who's really seen anything like, been to the Arctic, whales, the whole thing? It's mainly through your TV. So in the same way, I think we would hope that when we're old and we look back on our legacy, maybe we've done what Attenborough did for the TV. Maybe we've done that for virtual worlds, and in doing so, created a movement towards conservation. That would be the hope.
But I know exactly what you mean. I mean, I saw Tree Hugger and the Ocean of Air, and for me, it's in my memories. I have the feeling that I was there. I was inside of that sequoia tree, and I was able to fly above. And so I'm not sure if in my memories a movie would have the same, I don't know, extent. It's really this bodily kind of experience that makes it so special.
VR has a power for that, I think. Yeah, it's sort of you're less aware, I guess, with the film. Maybe cinemas are in really dark rooms for a reason, and to put you into that, so you're not aware of your surrounding. You're like lost in the film, and VR is stepping through the screen, isn't it?
I would, as a last question, go into the direction of, if artistic VR projects can raise awareness for not only science, but also maybe for political topics. Is that a good way to go in terms of how can we also deal with the whole situation that we're in now, lockdown and physical distancing? And
I've been thinking about this thing of empathy, and when you kick into gear, it's like if you're basically when you've had an experience that really affects you. So for example, if a member of your family was murdered through knife crime, then the chances of you fighting really hard against knife crime and dedicating your life to putting an end to that, then you're going to have this, because it's there and you've experienced the horror of it. It's going to have an impact. And probably on the other side, if you've been swimming with sperm whales and someone offers you some sperm whale sushi, you're going to be disgusted. So there is this correlation between the things you care about and the things you experience. It's also true that like love is the best tool we have. And like if you think about nature, beauty is this kind of is this tool for survival in a way. The beauty is seen throughout nature, and it connects plants and animals, and we're drawn to that beauty as well. So I kind of feel like that there's something in artwork or experiences that offer deep, intimate experience with sort of individuals, and that allows, or that is our best bet for creating empathy. I don't think it works so well from the helicopter view of a deforested, when you get that kind of clear-cut deforestation view, it's too much to engage with. But when you look at a single tree and all of the organisms in symbiosis and get to experience their different lens on reality, and then to understand that that's disappearing, that thousands of those go every split second, that probably has a lot more impact than the aerial view.
So, Barney, what I would really like to talk with you about whether digital technologies, online tools make it possible for us to stay connected, or to even create new networks, or to bond with others.
So this thing of intimacy and what we care about, and empathy. So I feel like if you look at like who's eating their dog, no one's eating their dogs, right? But you'll eat a lamb. Probably you'd really, really struggle to eat a lamb if you'd grown up with it and it had a name and you shared life with it. And I think we live in a sort of strange time where our sort of reach can go around the globe, and there's the impact of our actions. We can feel very distant to things because we don't have that intimate experience. And I think it's true to say that we care about the things that we fall in love with, and that changes our behavior. So if you're looking for a shift from consumerism to conservation, I think the route to that is through people having a deep intimacy, and so virtual reality is actually an amazing way to create that experience. Not only because you can you're simulating the way the body experiences the world, so you're creating a deeper immersive experience, which is more in kin with the way you meet people face to face. So I think the power, the collage of all those senses being engaged creates a deeper connection. But also you can take people out of their own bodies, which is something that you can only do in your imagination. And so the power to then see the world through the eyes of other people or other organisms is, or even just to be, shrunk down to or expanded to different levels. You're able to appreciate, I guess, the richness of other life forms in a way that you probably couldn't, even if you were standing in front of a tree. To really understand it or engage with it as a living, breathing being is quite hard until you think about accelerating time. And then you can see the way it reaches for the sun. And then when you can see inside, you realize that its roots extend out and it's connected to the other trees and that they're sharing nutrients. And there's all of these narratives that evolve that change the way you think about that tree, but you can't really see that with your eyeballs. And so what I'm getting to with all of this is that through the beauty of science, but also the qualities of virtual reality, being able to embody other people's perspectives, I think all of those kind of tools are a great way to create empathy and create the kind of deeper experiences that might change the way you think about yourself in relationship to other people and to the planet.
That's it for today. For our next episode, we will explore what digital objects are and why museums collect them. If you are interested in finding out more about Barney and Eva and their work, or the general topics they touched on, may I point you to the show notes in your podcast app, where a useful list of resources and links awaits you. The Culture and Technology podcast is produced by the Vienna Business Agency. The Vienna Business Agency supports Vienna's businesses, economy, and creative industries, and in doing so, shapes the city's future. Over and out. I hope you'll join us next time.